President Trump appears to have dropped the mask, going from a peace president to the regime change president. Those of you that remember Iraq know that this feels like a familiar playbook. But is he serious about having the U.S. regime change Iran, or is this just more presidential bluster? Plus, speaking of presidential bluster, of course, you can count on Vladimir Putin to give his own hot takes. Is this the start of World War III or just political posturing? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's try to answer it. Okay, so one of the things that I like about the president is that he tweets a lot. And the advantage of that is that you can know exactly what's on his mind, oftentimes in ways that aren't subtle or sort of workshopped through 1,000 different press people. And he did so 18 hours ago, where he said it's not politically correct to use the term regime change. But if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be regime change? Now, this is funny because when Trump says not politically correct, what he literally means is my political advisors tell me this is not something I should say. And this is totally correct because you might recall regime change wars in the United States have been a disaster over the last 25 years. In both Iraq and Afghanistan, we have attempted to change dictatorial autocratic regimes into regimes that are open and amenable to democracy. And in both cases, they have failed massively due to the fact that, well, people just don't like getting forced to change their government and culture, particularly by a foreign invader. So, this president appears to have not learned those lessons and now thinks that there's an easy, straightforward way to regime change Iran, a country of 93 million people. Now, the problem is additionally, it's not clear that while the president claims to have dealt, quote, monumental damage to Iran's nuclear sites, it is not nearly as clear that this is really the case. But here's the thing, right? These satellite images of, this is Fordo, one of Iran's underground nuclear enrichment facilities, you can see that there appear to have been new holes created by these bunker buster bombs. But what's interesting about these, let's see if we can find the before and after footage. Here's one of them. What I find most fascinating is that on one hand, they say, oh, well, there's a new hole that's been opened here, but the story is a little more complicated. And the reason I say that is because these are underground facilities. What's going to happen is that they are going to likely cave in or crater. And so on one hand, the Iranians are well known to keep their entrances and ventilation shafts a long way away from the main area, the main service area. And so by targeting ventilation shafts or entrances, you may not be targeting the core facility itself. But that may not necessarily be the problem, right? If the facility is secured and has only a few entrances and you collapse those entrances, you may have actually substantially still set back the enrichment process. Because remember, these are delicate machines that require constant maintenance. You can't simply shut them off. And so this still may indicate a deeper, more effective strike. So I wouldn't say that we know for sure one way or the other, barring if the facilities are intact. What'll happen is that Iran will definitely release media, literally probably like a walkthrough through these facilities, ideally with a narrator who is describing current events, as a way of proving that, yes, someone is in these facilities after the strikes, proving U.S. ineffectiveness. And if the Iranians don't do that, you can be pretty certain that some real damage has been done. But the question is not, now, was this an effective strike? The question is this leading to another regime change war? And before we talk about that, plus the sort of larger geopolitical situation and why I'm a critic of the president when he makes mistakes. I don't think this is one of those mistakes, and I'm going to explain why. But before we talk about that, I got a text recently from my friends in Ukraine who are saying that the Russian fiber optic drone threat is massive. And so we worked with UAO to launch one of our fundraisers. When these guys need resources badly, they know that the audience, you and me, of Combat Vet Reacts, we can show up and we can deliver for these guys. And particularly, this is a whole host of units, right? The Liu Brigade, the 59th, all these units across the front lines are dealing with the fiber optic drone threat. And to deal with it, they need some new gear, particularly their own fiber optic drones with a 30-kilometer range to perform reconnaissance, to trace Russian fiber optic drones back to their point of origin and take out the teams, right? Then you can also, of course, we're getting them some collimators. These are a special kind of red dot sight that can go onto shotguns and make shooting down these FPVs at the last minute much easier. Of course, we're going to get them some mobility so that they can stay, so they are exposed for less amounts of time, and a lot of netting that can capture the drones before they strike and detonate. This is the number one issue on the front lines. Again, these guys are saying that it is a crisis level event for them. And so I said, of course, we are going to step up and help you guys out. What I want to point out is they are, if you raise basically the equivalent of about one fiber optic drones or one drone's worth of funds, you're going to get a patch from the 59th. And this is one of the most storied units in the Ukrainian military. Literally, the guys have their own Wikipedia page and have fought just about everywhere. They are notable because they are the brigade of Chosen Company, the Western Volunteer Assault Unit. But they've also notable because since November 2024, they have been one of the core defenders of Pokrovsk, right? When I was in Ukraine in November 2024, the thinking was Pokrovsk was basically done for. The Russians were going to keep their advance, but the 59th stopped them cold. So rep the 59th, and also, if you make a $400 donation, guys, I'll also give you a patch of the free Donbas, which I've never seen actually before, which I think is actually sick because obviously the Russians have their own completely different flag for the occupied Donbas. So this is literally a symbol of, Donetsk Oblast. This is a symbol of the free Donetsk. So check it out. The link is, of course, going to be in the description. Also, guys, if you haven't bought your Strike Gum, you absolutely should. Don't drink energy drinks, guys. Trust me, I just had my second kid and I need caffeine. And when coffee doesn't cut it, I pop a Strike Gum, I chew it, I get the energy surge I need, and I can lock in and get things done, right? So if that's you, strikegum.com. Okay, so here's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about Vladimir Putin because, of course, he's going to weigh in on it. And it's fascinating because he slams the U.S., saying, why would you take these unprovoked strikes on poor, innocent Iran? But it says we're not actually going to help them, right? In fact, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said the U.S. strikes on Iran would actually not affect efforts to improve ties between Washington and Moscow, calling them independent issues, which is fascinating because Iran, you might recall, is actually strongly linked to the Russian regime. The Russian Shaheeds that bomb Ukrainian cities every single night are an Iranian design, and the first several thousand Shaheeds were actually purchased by Russia from Iran, made in Iranian factories. Now the Shaheeds are actually made in Russia itself. But even more critically, the Russian air defenses, the ones that failed so epically in the face of both the Israeli airstrikes and then were utterly powerless to stop American airstrikes, those air defenses provided wholesale by Russia to Iran. And these likely were accompanied by technical experts from Russia who said, listen, here's how to counter Western air assets, failing to appreciate just how stealth aircraft can just slice right through these conventional air defenses. But here's what I think is funny. Calling it absolutely unprovoked aggression against Iran, because this is almost comical coming from Vladimir Putin, who of course invaded Ukraine completely unprovoked, and that's probably one of the reasons he's not actually willing to use any kind of stronger language. Basically, sorry that happened, bro, is what this amounts to, and he can't do more because if he implies that there is an international order in which country sovereignty has to be respected, well, that's like the old meme. You point one finger at somebody else and there's three pointing at you. And so, again, Vladimir Putin is actually kind of embarrassed, and as one of his allies is really revealed itself as being much weaker than anyone thought. But also one more comical one. Iran is exercising legitimate defense against these aggressions. Now, Russia's official position is that Ukraine's efforts to resist Russian aggression are acts of terrorism. But you can always count on Russia to never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Now, I want to add one more interesting piece of context, and let's see if I can even run this. But this is an interview that the vice president gave before Trump's tweet. And I want to listen to this because this, to me, is emblematic of kind of one of my biggest criticisms of the administration. And that is the fact that it's not clear they have a real plan. So listen to J.D. Vance on ABC News.
Getting the supreme leader in Iran, as the U.S. ruled out trying to...
Let's here, I'll even do you guys a favor. I listen to everything at 1.5 speed because I get bored easily.
Achieve regime change.
This is before the president tweeted about regime change.
Well, first of all, we don't want to achieve regime change. We want to achieve the end of the Iranian nuclear program, John. That's America's objective, and that's what the president has set us out to do. The president, in the very tweet you mentioned, or the truth that you mentioned, John, said explicitly that he's not trying to take out the Iranian supreme leader. He's trying to take out their nuclear program. And of course, we took a major step forward with that last night. And again, John, I think we have to back up and test some premises here. How do you achieve long-term peace? How do you prevent spiraling Middle Eastern conflict? Is it through overwhelming military power targeted to an American objective? Or is it by sort of walking yourself into these long-term protracted military conflicts? I think by choosing overwhelming force, and overwhelming force tied to something that is important to the American people, that is the end of the Iranian nuclear program, we can achieve peace much more fully than if we sort of sit on our hands and hope that somehow if the Iranians get a nuclear weapon, they're going to be more peaceful. That is a...
Okay, so this is important because, one, he literally got proven wrong like hours later as the president contradicted him. But also, this is exactly the kind of perspective. This is actually one of the reasons why I think they're right to do this. And the sad part is that we understand that force is something that dictators and autocrats respond to. They respond to incentives, not performances or strong language or no words. And the fact that that Putin operates in this blind spot for the president is actually more absurd, right? Now let's talk. All right, let's have a frank conversation about why I support this. And again, it's not because I think the US has some mystical obligation to protect the state of Israel. I'm not even going to get into that, but I think if you watch this channel, you know I have serious problems with Israeli military policy. But the fact is that the Iranians really, here's why they can't get a nuclear weapon, actually. It's because the Iranians aren't just sworn enemies of the Israelis. They're also sworn enemies of a bunch of other people in the Middle East. Remember, the Iranian-backed Houthi militias, they are fighting a Saudi-backed government in Yemen. Iranian militias have basically taken portions of Lebanon hostage. They have confronted many of the Gulf states. So all of these powers in the Middle East, all these regional players, are all trying to consider themselves rivals of Iran. And the problem is, if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, who else has to get a nuclear weapon to prevent themselves from being subject to nuclear blackmail? Well, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia will have to get it. Likely the Jordanians will believe they have to get it, especially if they look around and say, damn, the Saudis have it and the Saudis have it and the Iranians have it. So you see how quickly now, do you really want to live in a world in which literally a map of the Middle East is all nuclear powers? Do those countries have track records of being responsible in their use of force and their discretion? And again, these are regimes that in some cases fell or don't even have full control over their own territory. So and remember, literally as late as 2014, large portions of Middle Eastern countries were taken over by a random militia group called ISIS. All of this is a good reason to say the Iranians, we should just keep that entire area denuclearized. It's one of the reasons why the Israelis won't come out and say they have a nuclear weapon, is because if they do, then the Saudis will have to say, we have to nuclearize. The Jordanians will have to say, we need to nuclearize. So this whole thing is a multi-decade campaign by the U.S. to tamp down nuclear proliferation among states who are very, very prone to using force in ways that other countries, other regions generally don't do. But there's more to it than that. Iran, yeah, I think we should have probably stuck with the 2015 deal, Joe Picoa, but Trump withdrew from that. And so here's the problem. Trump administration said, listen, we're going to sit down directly with Iran, no Israeli intermediary, and we're going to negotiate out a nuclear deal. And Iran said, great, we are absolutely going to, let's talk. Let's talk about this potential. Well, there's a little problem, and that is that the IAEA, they are the entity that conducts inspections of all the world's nuclear programs. This is a UN body. They're not American. They're not Israeli. They are completely seen as neutral. And their job is to inspect peaceful nuclear facilities to confirm that the use of the facilities is entirely peaceful. Well, what has the IAEA said about the Iranians? Well, on June 12th, just a week ago, the IAEA said, hey, Iran is no longer complying with its nuclear obligations. This is the first time in 20 years that the IAEA has said, listen, Iran is up to something in their nuclear program, right? And Iran, instead of saying, oh, we're sorry, we're going to get in compliance, this was a paperwork error, it said, no, we're actually launching a new enrichment site with new centrifuges. And literally hours later, the Israelis initiated their assaults targeting Iranian nuclear facilities. So likely, this is probably actually a pre-established Iranian red line that said, listen, if this neutral inspection body says the Iranians are no longer complying, they are up to something in their nuclear program, the Israelis likely had it on autopilot to just strike these targets. The other thing that's worth noting that I think we should place into context here is that Iran says its nuclear program is solely for peaceful civilian purposes. Well, why would you build your enrichment facility under 60 meters of rock, literally in a fucking mountain? Okay, that is a little bit paranoid for peaceful nuclear enrichment. You also have the problem of the fact that Iran is enriching uranium 20 times more pure than is necessary for the civilian reactors. A civilian nuclear reactor requires about 3.6% pure U-235. And by contrast, the Iranians are refining U-235 up to 60% pure. Now, that's still not weapons grade uranium, but weapons grade uranium is 90%. So you can see how the Iranians are for a peaceful nuclear program, they are deploying massive resources in an incredibly highly defended facility in order to enrich uranium to 60%, to 20 times more pure than any civilian use could possibly warrant. This is really strange for a country that explicitly says we only want peaceful nuclear material. Doesn't make any sense unless their goal is to either build a bomb or to almost build a bomb, which I want to point out is actually another policy of a lot of non-nuclear states, where they position themselves to be able to implement what they call a crash program. Say, listen, we're not building a nuclear bomb. We're building conventional bombs that could easily be converted to nuclear warheads, and we are maintaining a stockpile of peaceful uranium, of non-weapons grade uranium, that we can easily, quickly convert into weapons grade uranium. So you say, I don't have a bomb program, I just have a uranium enrichment program, and I have a long-range conventional missile or warhead program. And yeah, maybe one day in the future, in an emergency, we'll have to take as little as 90 days or as little as 6 months and quick mash the two together. This is actually something that we believe that countries like Japan, for example, that has a very advanced refining, military engineering, missile defense and missile systems. And so it's generally accepted that the Japanese, if they said, hey, listen, we don't think we need to be our own nuclear security, they could probably have a nuclear weapon in as little as 90 days. And again, those things aren't accidents. They are a lot of countries' plan. That's the policy. They probably don't explicitly state it, right? Because that would mean you have a nuclear program. But that's probably what the Iranians were going for, right? They want to be able to say, listen, if things get a little too real for us, we have the ability to be 90 days from a bomb. Now, this is why overall I actually support this, even if it is a little bit of like cutting the grass. Like the Iranians will rebuild and will start refining again. But what's worth note is that these centrifuges cannot be made in Iran. They have to be ordered from elsewhere. And this targeting them is actually an effective way to impede their ability to conduct this kind of nuclear diplomacy. But what I really wanted to talk about is the other shit Iran's been doing, because a lot of people, especially on left-wing Twitter, and I hate social media, and I have a special hatred for like the ignorance of left-wing Twitter because they're so dumb. The reason is because a lot of people are like, Iran never provoked anyone. These attacks were unprovoked. Peaceful Iran. They merely wanted to follow their extreme version of Islam. Why would you hurt them? Is it because you're defending the Israelis? Why would you escalate this situation? Why would you antagonize the Iranians? Guys, if striking Iranian nuclear facilities, peaceful nuclear facilities buried in a literal mountain fortress, is escalatory, then would it also be escalatory, for example, if the U.S. was to bomb Iranian Navy ships? Well, that didn't happen, but Iranian militia, like the Houthis, bombed American and British ships. Did the Iranians face any consequences for this? Oh, they struck some of the Houthi launch sites, sure, to stop them from doing it in the future, but it's kind of weird that the Houthis have said, actually, and again, remember, the Houthis, random Yemeni tribesmen, by the way, guys, do not have access to anti-ship ballistic missiles, okay? It's called a clue when the goat herders show up with anti-ship ballistic missiles. It's because they're given to them by the Iranians. And for literally 2 years, the Iranian proxies have been launching missile attacks against civilian and military ships in the Red Sea. Their goal is to sink enough of them to block the Red Sea, or simply to stop commercial traffic from passing through it, dealing significant economic damage to the globe. And they say, oh, we're only targeting ships linked to Israel. But the data says that this actually isn't the case at all. As you can see, the Iranians target vessels with all kinds of ownership. And this is just like classic. But the problem is they also target the Houthis claim they would not target ships that had no military function, a war crime. And detention of captured crews is also hostage taking. And Human Rights Watch called the Israeli strikes on Yemen a possible war crime since it targeted civilians. But it's unclear that targeting civilian shipping is somehow not a war crime. And it's fine that the Iranians do it. But also, guys, if you think that targeting Iranian nuclear sites strikes is a dangerous escalation, what would you call the Iranian attacks on U.S. bases, right? These are U.S. bases in sovereign countries, not Iran. Iraqi bases in Iraq, bases in Syria, bases in Jordan have all been targeted by Iranian militia. And in some cases, U.S. soldiers are actually killed. And so this is really important because these are all escalations that were just not responded to. And so imagine, and remember, this is not a current thing. In fact, the Iranian-backed militias have been literally killing U.S. service members as early as 2014 in Iraq. So this is really, to me, you have to place things in the larger context of this idea that this is why the Iranians use these militia, is so they can sit there and go, guys, you were attacked by the Houthis. You weren't attacked by Iran. You don't ask about how the Houthis learned how to use anti-ship ballistic missiles, advanced, surface-to-air missiles to shoot down drones. Don't ask where the goat herders got them. But you were attacked by goat herders, and you should do something about those goat herders, by the way. Okay? Just like, oh, your base in Iraq got targeted by armed loitering munitions. Well, man, those Iraqi tribesmen, they've been building those loitering munitions right and left. You should really watch out for them. At some point, the U.S. is going to go, listen. And they still, to the president's credit, he sat there and said, listen, Iran, let's talk out this nuclear program. We're literally going to just ignore the strikes on our ships. We're going to ignore the war crimes your people committed against civilian shipping vessels trying to disrupt global trade. And we're going to ignore the repeated uranium enrichment and the giant fortress you built to conduct your peaceful enrichment. And we're just going to have these talks. So imagine you're actively participating in these talks, and then the IAEA knocks on your door and says, hey, FYI, world, the Iranians, they're not complying with internationally accepted standards for a peaceful nuclear program. Something is happening. Something is being diverted. If you're the United States, you go, what the fuck, man? We thought you sat here in good faith, and you did this. So again, that is my holistic view of why I think these specific strikes, the thing that the vice president talked about, again, the vice president always tries to reasonable wash this, but this is actually not an unreasonable stance for the U.S. to take. The problem is that this is a far cry from, oh, we're going to regime change Iran. And when the president tweets that, we know that it is the last time the U.S. tried regime change, it actually basically collapsed two governments, replaced the Taliban with the Taliban, right? And in the process, cost America $1 trillion and tens of thousands of American lives. And also in Iraq, Iran was actually able to expand its power base. Iranian-backed militia and Iranian-backed political groups have almost total control of the Iranian government, or the Iraqi government. So it is a very, or are massively influential. They don't have total control. They're massively influential in the Iraqi government. And that is smaller, these are smaller countries with weaker governments, and that's trying to regime change them. It's been a disaster. And remember, when you drive over a pothole, when your school is a little shittier, when your government VA care is a little worse, that's because, in part, we spent $1 trillion that should have gone to Americans, and we spent it on Iraq and Afghanistan. So, regime change wars. So when the president starts talking about regime change, you're not a turbo leftist. Again, it is a completely reasonable stance to say that that is absolute bullshit. Anyway, guys, hit that subscribe button. More importantly, help out the Ukrainian guys. Also, on a personal level, Preston Stewart, his fans raised 70 G's. I think we can double it. I think we can triple it, honestly, for the Ukrainians. There's a reason when they really needed the fiber optic drones, they came to us. So let's make good on it. Let's show them what we can do. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thank you so much. See you in the next one. Cheers.